She didn't scream. That was the thing that broke Jack Callahan open. Not the sound of the slap, not the coffee pot exploding against the floor. Not even the sight of Maggie Harlow's hand shooting out to catch the counter's edge so she wouldn't fall. It was the silence afterward. The way she stood there with her cheek turned and her knuckles white and her jaw set, absorbing it the way a woman absorbs something she has absorbed before, without surprise, without hope that anyone in that room was going to move. 6 men, not one of them stood up. Jack set down his cup and stood up. If something just moved in your chest, that's exactly where this story lives. Subscribe right now and stay with me through every part, because Maggie Harlow's fight is just beginning, and the man who finally stood up for her is carrying secrets of his own that are going to change everything. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far one woman's courage can travel. Jack Callahan had not started a fight in 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days. He kept the count the way a man dying of thirst counts his swallows, not because the number meant anything, but because the counting was the only discipline he had left. 4 years since the last man he'd put in the ground. 4 years since he'd looked at his hands afterward and felt something worse than guilt. Something that didn't have a name. Something that didn't wash off. He'd drifted into Red Rock Valley the way smoke drifts into a room, slow quiet, without announcing itself. Rented a room above the feed store. Took his meals at Harlow's Diner. Spoke when spoken to, and even then kept it short. Same table every morning. Window seat, left side, clear line to the door. Old habits from older wars. Maggie Harlow had never once asked him about it. That alone told him everything he needed to know about her. Most people who ran establishments in towns like Red Rock felt compelled to fill silence with pleasantries, with questions, with the nervous small talk of people who couldn't stand the shape of a man they couldn't categorize. Maggie wasn't like that. She brought his coffee without being asked, kept it filled without hovering, treated him the way a woman treats weather she's long since learned to read with steady eyes and no false comfort. He respected that. He didn't say so. He didn't say much about anything those days. He was trying very hard to be nothing. It was the hardest thing he'd ever attempted. Harder than the war. Harder than the years after the war when he'd ridden with men whose names he was still trying to forget. Being nothing required a discipline that violence never had. Violence was easy. Violence was instinct, but stillness, real stillness. The kind that didn't crack at the first sound of a woman's pain, that required something closer to faith. He wasn't sure he had enough of it left. That Tuesday morning in October started cold. Iron smell in the air, the kind that comes before rain. Jack was on his second cup watching the empty street through the window when the door opened. He didn't look up right away. He heard the boots first. Heavy, deliberate. The particular rhythm of a man who had never once in his life felt the need to soften his arrival. Then he heard Maggie's breathing change, just slightly, just enough. The way a person breathes when they are reminding themselves very quickly to be careful. Jack looked up. Sheriff Royce Grady stood in the center of the diner like he'd grown there. 6'3" broad through the chest badge, catching the morning light like it was the most natural thing in the world. He had a face that might have been decent once before whatever lived inside him had finished eating through. His eyes were the color of creek water in February, pale and still and cold all the way down. They were fixed on Maggie. He crossed the room without a word. His boots cracked against the floorboards like a metronome. Young Cody, the ranch hand at the near table, went rigid in his chair fork halfway to his mouth, the way a rabbit goes rigid when it hears a sound it recognizes but hopes it misidentified. Maggie didn't move. Both hands flat on the counter. Chin level. Expression carefully, deliberately blank, the face of a woman who had learned through long practice that showing fear only extended the performance. "Mrs. Harlow," Grady said. His voice was pleasant. That was the worst part, how pleasant it always was. "I believe we had an appointment." "We didn't," Maggie said. "You told me to be available. That's not an appointment." "Now see." He tilted his head patient, as a man explaining arithmetic to a child. That kind of distinction is exactly the problem. "The problem," Maggie said, "is that I've given you my answer 4 times now, and you keep coming back like it's going to change. The diner isn't for sale. My land isn't for sale. Nothing I have is for sale to you." "Everything's for sale," Grady said quietly. "It's just a matter of agreeing on a price. Then we don't agree." She turned her back on him, reached for a stack of cups to organize. Her hands were steady. Jack noticed she was working very hard to keep them that way. "You're welcome to order breakfast, Sheriff. Otherwise, I'd ask you to let me get back to work." The silence that followed had mass to it. Weight. The kind of silence that presses against the walls. Jack set his coffee cup down. Grady moved 2 steps fast, and then the sound split the morning open. A flat, percussive crack that landed in Jack's chest before his mind had finished processing it. The coffee pot hit the floor and exploded into pieces. Maggie's hand shot out and caught the counter's edge. She didn't fall. She didn't cry out. She just stood there with her cheek turned, one pin knocked loose from her hair, her knuckles bone white against the wood, and something inside Jack Callahan. Something he had spent 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days burying, cracked open right along with it. He was on his feet before he'd made the decision. Not fast, not loud. He simply stood the way a door stands when someone opens it inevitably, without apology. He walked forward. His boots were quiet. He'd learned that in a different life, that the men who announced themselves were rarely the ones you needed to worry about. Grady heard him coming and turned. Up close, the sheriff was bigger than he looked from across the room. He had 4 inches on Jack, maybe 30 pounds. He was also a man who had not, in recent memory, encountered anything in Red Rock Valley that did not yield to him, and it showed in his posture, automatic, reflexive, the stance of a man who had stopped questioning the assumption. Jack stopped 4 feet away. "The lady asked you to leave," he said. Grady looked at him, taking inventory. Not afraid, not yet, but recalculating the way a man recalculates when he steps on ground he thought was solid and feels it shift. "This is a private business matter," Grady said. "Move along." "I don't reckon it is," Jack said. "Private business doesn't leave marks." A beat of silence. "You're new in town," Grady said. "So I'll say this once. Walk back to your table. Finish your coffee. We'll call this a misunderstanding between strangers." "I know how things work here," Jack said. "You don't know a damn thing about how things work here." "I know a man who hits women in public isn't doing it because he has to," Jack said. "He's doing it because nobody's stopped him yet." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Grady's pleasant expression didn't disappear. It just became something else wearing the same face. He took 1 step forward, then stopped. Because there was something in Jack's stillness, not threat exactly, not posturing, but the memory of violence, the residue of 1,000 moments. Exactly like this one moment's that hadn't ended cleanly or quietly. And even Grady, wrapped in all his armor of authority and habit, and years of men looking away, felt the edge of it. He laughed instead, short, sharp, a performance for the room. He looked around at the ranch hands, the woman with her daughter, young Cody, still frozen with his fork, making sure they were watching. Men like Grady always needed witnesses. Not to the violence, to the aftermath, to the part where everyone understood who was in charge. "Ask Earl Briggs about this man," he announced to the room, pleasant and loud. "Ask Earl what kind of fellow makes other people's business his own." He turned back to Jack, voice dropping to something that was almost intimate. "I know who you are, Callahan. Made it my business to know the day you rode in." Jack said nothing. "You think you've left it all behind." Grady leaned in close enough that Jack could smell tobacco and something else underneath, something sour and old, like rot that had been painted over. "You haven't left anything. You're just dragging it slower." He held Jack's gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he straightened, tugged the front of his coat, and walked to the door. At the threshold he turned casual, as a man leaving a social call. "Mrs. Harlow, Friday. Think carefully." He touched the brim of his hat. "I'd hate for this to get complicated." The door swung shut. The spurs faded down the boardwalk. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Cody's fork with a small precise click, like a man carefully returning a pin to a grenade. The ranch hands at the back table exhaled in unison and became very interested in their plates. The woman with the daughter pulled the girl close and stared at the wall and said nothing. Jack turned. Maggie had not moved from the counter. One hand still braced on the wood. The other had come up to her cheek, not pressing it, just resting there. Her eyes were dry. He noticed she was staring at a fixed point on the far wall, with the focused concentration of a woman, running a very specific calculation in her mind, the kind that involves deciding exactly how much she is allowed to feel before it becomes something she cannot contain. He recognized that calculation. He'd run it himself. Many times. He walked back to the counter, didn't sit, just stood a few feet from her close enough to talk quietly. "You all right?" he asked. Stupid question. He knew it when he said it. "I'm fine," she said. Automatic. Practiced. "Mrs. Harlow." She looked at him. Really looked for the first time, not the careful peripheral awareness she'd been maintaining for 3 months, but directly fully the way a person looks at something they've been avoiding looking at straight on. Her eyes were dark brown. He hadn't noticed that before, or hadn't let himself notice. There were lines at their corners that weren't from laughing. Her jaw was tight with the effort of holding her face in one piece. "I've been fine before," she said. "I know what it feels like. That's not the same thing as being fine now." Something moved through her expression fast, like a bird startled from a branch. There and gone. "He's been coming in here for 14 months, she said, quieter now. "Since Daniel died. Every few weeks. Always polite. Always with an offer. Always—" She stopped. Reset. "Today was the first time he—" She stopped again. "You don't have to say it." "No," she said. "I reckon I don't." She straightened, reached under the counter for a rag, began wiping down the surface with the same methodical care she brought to everything. Not frenetic, not numb, but the deliberate motion of a woman reassembling herself in real time, piece by piece, refusing to do it anywhere that couldn't be witnessed, and therefore refused to be shameful. Jack watched her and felt something twist in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. Not attraction, or not only that. Something older. Something that had a daughter's face attached to it in the part of his mind he didn't visit willingly. A face he hadn't seen in 15 years, the last time belonging to a girl of 11 standing in a doorway, watching him right away. Not crying, just watching with eyes that had already learned that the people you need most are the ones most likely to leave. He pushed the thought down, sealed it. "You were cavalry," Maggie said suddenly, not looking up from the counter. "Scout?" he said. "Long time ago." "And before that?" He met her eyes when she looked up. "Things I'm not proud of." She nodded once, turned away. "Coffee's going cold. I'll bring you a fresh cup." He went back to his table. Through the window, he could see Grady across the street, stopped in front of the land office. He was talking to a man Jack hadn't placed yet. Heavy-set, dark coat, the confident posture of a man whose authority came from paperwork rather than guns, but who had learned to use it just as effectively. They spoke for a minute. The man in the dark coat glanced toward the diner. Jack watched them both and said nothing, and thought about the way Maggie had said 14 months, the precision of it, the way grief always knows exactly how long it's been carrying itself down to the day. Maggie set a fresh coffee in front of him without a word. He waited until she'd stepped away. "That man Grady's talking to," he said quietly. "Who is he?" She didn't make it obvious that she was looking. Just a slight adjustment of angle, quick and practiced. "Thomas Aldridge," she said. "County Land Commissioner. And Grady's brother-in-law." She moved on down the counter. "They've been connected to every land transfer in this valley for the past 6 years." Jack absorbed that. "How did Daniel die?" Her hands paused on the cup she was rinsing. A half-second pause, no more. Then the motion resumed. "Riding accident," she said. "Out near Cartwright Creek. His horse came back without him. They find him. Eventually." Flat. Final. An entire conversation in one word. Jack turned back to the window. He thought about water rights and land records. He thought about the precision of 14 months and the particular blankness of eventually. He thought about a man who controlled every accident in a valley, and a sheriff who had stopped needing to pretend. He thought about Friday. 3 days. Earl Briggs had been pouring whiskey at the Dusty Spur since before the railroad bypassed Red Rock, an event he had never forgiven and frequently referenced as the singular cause of every misfortune in the valley up to and including the weather. He was 63 years old, missing 2 fingers on his left hand from a fence post disagreement in 1871, and he knew everything about Red Rock that was worth knowing and some things that weren't. People talked in front of bartenders the way they talked in front of furniture, without thought for whether the furniture was listening. Earl had always listened. Jack walked in at 2:30. The saloon was empty except for a man sleeping face down at the back table, and Earl himself working through a row of glasses with mechanical patience. "Callahan," Earl said, not looking up. "Heard you had yourself a morning." "Word travels. In a town this size, word doesn't travel so much as it was already there when you arrived." He set down a glass. "What are you drinking?" "Nothing yet." Jack sat. "Tell me about Daniel Harlow." Earl's hands slowed. Not stopped. Slowed. The careful measurement of a man choosing his portion. "Daniel Harlow," he said, "was a good man. Honest. Worked hard. Loved his wife in the plain, unglamorous way that decent men love when they don't have the words for anything more complicated. And that was enough. It was more than enough." And Grady. Grady wanted the water rights attached to Daniel's 80 acres out past Cartwright Creek. Earl picked up a fresh glass. "You control water in this valley. You control everything that needs it. Livestock, crops, people." He began polishing. Daniel told him no, politely because that was Daniel's way, but without any room for misunderstanding. And 3 months later, "Riding accident," Earl said. His voice was completely neutral. Buck Malone conducted the inquiry, ruled it accidental inside of 2 days. Buck Malone being Grady's deputy, a man who finds exactly what he's sent to find. Earl set the glass down. Didn't pick up another. "Maggie inherited the land, the water rights with it. Grady's made 4 offers. She's turned down every one." "He hit her this morning," Jack said. "In public, in front of 6 witnesses. 7, Earl said. "Cody told me. He was shaking when he came in." He looked at Jack steadily. "Those 7 witnesses will remember it differently by tomorrow. They always do." Jack was quiet for a moment. "Has anyone ever pushed back on Grady?" Martin Cole, 78, rancher, filed a complaint with the territorial office. Earl lined up the glass with the others. His barn burned 2 weeks later. He left the valley before the month was out. He paused. Ed Fry, 80, tried to organize some of the smaller landowners. Took a bad fall off a 2nd-story landing. Another pause. "They said he was drinking." "Was he?" Ed Fry hadn't touched a drop since his wife died in 76. Earl looked at him directly now. Tired, steady eyes. The eyes of a man who had watched too many things from too far away. "Son, I've seen that look before. Man had it down in Abilene back in 74. Was getting squeezed same as Maggie, same as everyone Grady touches. Had that look for about a week." "What happened to him?" "He's buried past the stockyards." Jack said nothing. "I'm not telling you to walk away," Earl said carefully. "I'm telling you what the ground looks like before you decide to stand on it." "I appreciate that." "Do you?" It wasn't quite a question. Jack stood, put some coins on the bar even though he hadn't drunk anything. Old habit, you didn't take a man's time without leaving something for it. "Grady said he knows who I am," Jack said. "How well informed is he generally?" Earl considered this. "Well enough to be dangerous, not well enough to be afraid." "That's useful," Jack said. He walked out into the late afternoon light, long shadows stretching across the street, the air gone sharp with coming cold. He stood on the boardwalk and looked at the land office. Neat. Official. Freshly painted. The kind of facade that said institution and meant don't look behind this. about Ellie. He didn't mean to. He never meant to. But moments like this one had a gravity to them. Moments where a choice was assembling itself whether he was ready or not, and when gravity took hold, her face came with it. 26 years old by now. A doctor somewhere in Colorado, or so he'd heard from a man who owed him news he hadn't asked for. He hadn't written. Hadn't tried to find her. Some debts are carried because carrying them is the only honest response left. She had her mother's eyes. She had his jaw, his stubbornness, and very possibly his tendency to plant herself somewhere she had no business being and refuse to move. He hoped she'd done better with it than he had. He pulled his hat down and turned away from the land office. 3 days until Friday. He had never been a patient man by nature, but he had learned patience the same way he'd learned everything hard through consequences. Through the specific education of understanding too late what happened when you moved before you knew the ground. He knew something about this ground now. He needed to know more. And somewhere in the land records of Red Rock Valley, in the deed transfers, and the survey reports and the paperwork that Thomas Aldridge, County Land Commissioner, and Grady's brother-in-law had been filing for 6 years, Jack suspected the ground would say a great deal more than anyone had bothered to listen for. He walked back toward his room. Behind him in Harlow's diner, a single lamp came on in the window. He didn't look back, but he knew it was there. The lamp in Harlow's diner burned until well past midnight. Jack knew because he could see it from his window above the feed store, that single warm rectangle of light in the dark street below, steady and quiet. The way Maggie herself was steady and quiet. The way things that have been tested long enough eventually either break or become something harder than they started. He lay on his back on the narrow cot and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep. He was thinking about water rights. He was thinking about a man named Daniel Harlow who had told Royce Grady no and was dead inside of 3 months. He was thinking about the particular blankness in Maggie's voice when she'd said, eventually, not grief, not anger, but the sound of a woman who had processed the worst of it alone in the dark, in a diner, with a single lamp burning, and come out the other side into something that looked like strength from the outside, and felt, he suspected, like exhaustion from within. He knew that feeling. He'd been living inside it for 4 years. Around 2 in the morning, the lamp went out. Jack watched the window go dark, and then kept watching the darkness for another hour, because sleep wasn't coming, and he'd stopped fighting that particular battle somewhere around the 2nd year. By the time the sky started going gray, he had made 3 decisions. First, he needed to see the land records. Second, he needed to do it without anyone knowing he was looking. Third, he needed to know exactly who Buck Malone was before Buck Malone decided to make himself relevant to his life in any direct way. He was dressed and out the door before sunrise. The street was empty, cold enough to see his breath. He walked the length of Main Street once slow, the way he used to walk a perimeter, not looking for anything specific, but letting the environment arrange itself in his mind, the distances and angles and lines of sight that most people never noticed, because most people had never needed to. The land office sat between the post office and the assay office. 1 door front, 1 window side. Back door into the alley, he confirmed it on his return pass, casual enough that a man watching from a window would see nothing more than someone walking off the cold. He filed the information away and went to the diner. Maggie was already behind the counter when he pushed through the door, hair pinned, apron straight. Coffee started. Like the morning before had been any other morning, which told Jack more about the depth of her practice than anything else could have. She looked up when he came in. There was a bruise along her left cheekbone, pale purple edged with yellow. She hadn't tried to cover it, and that told him something too. Either she had nothing to cover it with, or she'd decided not to. He suspected the second. Covering it would have been an acknowledgement, and acknowledgement would have given Grady something he didn't deserve. "Morning," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Morning," he said. He sat at his table. She brought the coffee. He waited until she started to turn away. "I need to ask you something," he said quietly, "and I need you to think about whether you trust me enough to answer it before you decide." She stopped. turned back slowly, looked at him with those dark eyes that had stopped pretending sometime between last night and this morning that he was just a regular customer at a window table. "Ask," she said. "The land your husband filed on. The 80 acres near Cartwright Creek." He kept his voice low, even conversational to anyone glancing through the window. "Do you still have the original deed, the survey documents?" Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise calculation. She was thinking through why he was asking before she answered, which was exactly what he'd have done in her position. "They're at the house," she said carefully. "Why? Because Grady wants that land badly enough to have waited 14 months and 4 rejected offers before losing his patience this publicly," Jack said. "Men like Grady don't lose patience without reason. Something changed. Something put pressure on the timeline." Her eyes sharpened. "What kind of something? I don't know yet, but I'd like to look at those documents." She studied him for a long moment. The diner was empty, still too early for the regulars, just the two of them and the sound of coffee working itself on the stove. "Why?" she asked, not hostile, genuinely asking. "Because I was a cavalry scout for 11 years, Jack said. "And before that, I rode with men who made their living knowing which land had water and which didn't, and what that was worth, and how to take it from the people who had it." He held her gaze. "I know what that kind of scheme looks like from the inside, Mrs. Harlow. I've been on the wrong side of one." The words cost him something. He could feel it, the small withdrawal from an account he'd been carefully rebuilding, the account of a man who didn't have to say certain things out loud anymore. But she deserved the truth of why he was qualified to help her, and the truth wasn't clean. Maggie looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she untied her apron. "I open the diner at 7, she said. "I can be back by 8 if I walk fast. Can you manage the coffee for an hour?" He blinked. Yes. "Don't let anyone run a tab," she said, retying the apron. "Especially not Cody. He'll try." She paused at the door to the back room, half-turned. "The documents are in a box under the floorboard in the bedroom, left side near the window. There's a loose board, you'll feel it." She met his eyes. "I'll bring everything." She pushed through the back, and he heard the rear door open and close. Jack sat alone in the diner with the coffee and the silence, and the particular feeling of a man who had just been trusted with something expensive by someone who had very good reasons not to trust anyone at all. He refilled his own cup. He waited. She was back in 53 minutes. He knew because he'd been counting. Old habit. She came through the front door with a flat wooden box under one arm, and her cheeks flushed from the cold, and her eyes sharp with something that might have been fear, or might have been the particular alertness that comes when a person decides after a long time standing still to move. She set the box on his table and sat across from him, the first time she'd sat at any customer's table. He realized in the 3 months he'd been coming here. She opened the box. The documents were neat, carefully preserved. She was a woman who understood that paper was power, or at least that it could be in the right hands. Deed of claim. Original survey. Map, 2 letters from the Territorial Land Office confirming the filing, and a third document he almost missed, tucked beneath the others. Older, the ink faded to the color of weak tea. He pulled it out carefully. It was a survey report, dated 1877, 3 years before Daniel Harlow's claim. The surveyor's name at the bottom was a man called R.P. Aldridge. Jack looked up. "Thomas Aldridge," he said. "The land commissioner. What's his first name?" "Thomas Robert," Maggie said, watching his face. "Why?" Jack turned the paper toward her and pointed to the signature. She stared at it. Her face went very still. "R.P. Aldridge," she read. "Robert P. Aldridge," Jack said. "I'd need to confirm it. But if that's the same family, if Thomas Aldridge's father or uncle or brother conducted the original survey on this land..." He stopped. Let her finish the thought herself. "Then the survey was never independent," she said slowly. "The Aldridge family has known what this land is worth since 1877. She looked up. "Before Daniel ever filed." "Before Daniel ever filed," Jack confirmed. They sat with that for a moment. "That's not enough," Maggie said. "Having the same name isn't..." "No," Jack agreed. It's not enough, but it's a thread. He carefully replaced the document in the box. Who keeps the land records for the county physically? Where are they stored? The land office, she said. Thomas Aldridge's office. Of course. Is there anyone else? A copy filed somewhere else, Territorial Office Federal Records? Maggie thought for a moment. The post office sends a copy of all deed filings to Santa Fe every quarter. Mandatory territorial requirement. Daniel made sure of it. He was careful that way. She paused. He was very careful. Her voice shifted on that last sentence. Just slightly. Just enough. Jack didn't push it. Santa Fe, he said. That's a start. She closed the box. Her hands were steady on the lid. He watched her jaw work for a moment, the way a person's jaw works when they are deciding whether to say the next thing. He wasn't careless, she said finally, not looking up. Daniel. People said it was carelessness, that he'd been out near the creek too many times in the dark, that he knew that land should have known better. That's what Buck Malone put in the report. She pressed her palms flat against the box. Daniel had been riding that land for 2 years. He knew every rock, every dip, every place where the bank got soft near the water. She looked up. He would not have fallen. I know, Jack said. You don't know, she said. Not harsh, just precise. You didn't know him. No, Jack said. But I know the shape of an accident that isn't one. I've seen enough of them. He held her gaze. I believe you. Something happened in her face then, something he hadn't expected. Not relief exactly. Something rawer than that. The expression of a person who has been saying a true thing for 14 months to people who nodded politely and believed nothing, and has just for the first time been believed. She looked away quickly. More coffee, she said. Please, he said. She got up and got the pot, and the morning began to fill with the sound of the door opening and customers coming in, and the ordinary business of the diner resumed around them like water closing over a stone, and nobody who came through that door would have known that anything had happened at that window table at all, which was exactly how Jack needed it. Buck Malone came into the dusty spur at noon. Jack was already there. He'd taken a corner seat an hour earlier with a glass of water and Earl's grudging tolerance, and he'd watched the door with the peripheral patience of a man who had spent years learning how to be present in a room without appearing to be paying attention. Buck Malone was younger than Jack had expected. Late 20s, maybe 30. Big through the shoulders, heavy-handed with a deputy's badge worn slightly too high on his chest, the habit of a man who wanted it noticed. He had a face that was almost friendly, the kind of face that made people drop their guard, because it looked like the face of someone's cousin at a church social, right up until it didn't. He came in alone. Ordered whiskey at the bar. Talked to Earl with the easy familiarity of a man who came here often and had never once worried about being welcome. Earl poured, kept his face neutral. Jack had noticed that Earl had a gift for neutrality. He wore it like a second skin over whatever he was actually thinking, which was, Jack suspected, considerable. Buck drank his first whiskey without sitting both elbows on the bar, turned slightly so he could see the room. His eyes moved across it in a professional sweep, doorways, windows, faces, and Jack was careful to be looking at his glass when the sweep reached his corner. Not careful enough. Callahan, Buck said. Jack looked up, as if he'd just noticed. Deputy, he said. Buck picked up his glass and walked over, pulled out the chair across without being invited, and sat in it with the particular casualness of a man demonstrating that he didn't need invitations. Heard about this morning, Buck said pleasantly. At the diner. Did you? News travels. He set his glass down. You from around here originally, but no. Where from? Different places, Jack said. You need something specific. Deputy, or is this a social visit? Buck smiled. It was a good smile, practiced. The kind that looked genuine from 3 feet away and showed its machinery at 2. I want to give you some friendly advice, Buck said, man to man, because you seem like somebody who can hear something straight and appreciate it. Jack said nothing. Let the silence be an invitation. Sheriff Grady runs a tight operation in this valley, Buck said. Keeps things orderly. Keeps the peace. That's good for business. Good for the community. Good for everybody. He turned his glass on the table, slow rotation. A man comes into that kind of order, new man, nobody knows his business, and starts inserting himself into situations that aren't his concern that creates friction. Friction creates problems. Problems have a way of falling on whoever caused them. That a warning? Jack asked. It's an observation, Buck said pleasantly. Friendly one. Jack lifted his glass, set it down. Here's my observation. Man comes to a table uninvited and gives friendly advice to a stranger who didn't ask for it. That man's not worried about friction. He's worried about something specific. He met Buck's eyes directly. What's Grady worried about, Deputy? The smile held. But something shifted behind it. A quick assessing readjustment, the way a card player's eyes move when somebody plays an unexpected hand. Sheriff Grady's not worried about anything, Buck said. Then you're here for yourself, Jack said. And you came on your lunch hour, which means this isn't official. Which means you're carrying a message somebody didn't want delivered in uniform. He tilted his head slightly. Who told you to come? Buck stood up, unhurried, put his hat back on. Stay out of business that isn't yours, Callahan, he said. Still pleasant. But the pleasantness was thinner now, like paper held up to light. Red Rock's a good town. Hate to see a man leave it badly. He walked out. Jack sat with his water and thought about what Buck Malone had just told him without intending to. Grady knew he was looking into something, or suspected it. He'd sent Buck within 3 hours of this morning's confrontation, which meant Grady had spent those 3 hours thinking about Jack. Which meant he wasn't as certain of his footing as he'd appeared in the diner, which meant there was footing to be uncertain of. He was on the right track. He just needed to know what was at the end of it before Grady figured out he was walking it. He got up and left 2 coins on the table and walked out into the afternoon. Earl Briggs found him at the feed store at 4 o'clock. Jack heard the knock and opened the door to find the old bartender standing in the hallway with his hat in his hands and an expression that had moved past carefully neutral into something that looked almost like decision. You got a minute? Earl said. Come in, Jack said. Earl sat in the one chair the room offered. Jack sat on the edge of the cot. The old man turned his hat in his hands for a moment, the nervous gesture of someone who had been keeping something for a long time and had decided the keeping was costing more than the telling. I didn't tell you everything yesterday, Earl said. I know, Jack said. Earl glanced up. How? Because there's always more. And you were measuring me. Jack kept his voice level. What didn't you say? Earl let out a slow breath, turned the hat once more. Daniel Harlow didn't just file a land claim, he said. About 6 months before he died, he came to me. Quiet private bought a drink, talked about the weather for 10 minutes, then told me he'd found something. He paused. He'd been down near Cartwright Creek after a heavy rain. The water level had dropped first time in years, he said, low enough to see the creek bed clearly. And what he found in that creek bed was a survey marker. Jack went still. Not his, Earl continued. An old one, pre-territorial, marked with an Aldridge stamp. He looked up. Jack, that creek doesn't run through Daniel's 80 acres. It runs through 40 acres adjacent land that's been listed as public domain in the territorial record since 1869. Jack felt something lock into place in his mind, clean and cold. Except it isn't public domain, he said. It was quietly transferred to a private holding company in 1878, Earl said. A company called Valley Water Associates Incorporated in New Mexico Territory. He held Jack's gaze. I had a cousin worked in Santa Fe at the Territorial Land Office at the time. He wrote me a letter about it, thought it was irregular the way the transfer was documented. I kept the letter because... He stopped. I don't know why I kept it. Insurance, maybe. Against a day I might need it. Do you still? Jack asked. Earl reached into his coat pocket and produced a folded envelope creased and soft with age. Valley Water Associates, he said, placing it on the cot beside Jack. Grady's name isn't on the incorporation documents, neither is Aldridge's, but the registered agent. He tapped the envelope. A woman named Clara Grady, Royce Grady's mother, died in 1882, which means the controlling interest transferred to her estate, which Royce inherited, Jack said, along with 200 acres of water rights and surface claims on land that the territorial government still believes is public domain. Earl sat back. Daniel found that marker. He told me he was going to write to Santa Fe, request the original survey records, cross-reference them with the public domain listing. He was quiet for a moment. He was dead inside of 6 weeks. The room was very quiet. And you've been sitting on this letter for how long? Jack asked. Since Daniel died, Earl said, 14 months. Why didn't you give it to Maggie? Because giving it to Maggie makes Maggie the most dangerous person in this valley. Earl's voice was flat and tired. And I've watched what happens to dangerous people in this valley. He looked at Jack steadily. I didn't think there was anyone to give it to who could do anything with it. Not safely, not effectively. He paused. I'm still not sure there is. But you're here, Jack said. I'm here, Earl said. Because this morning you stood up in that diner in front of 6 witnesses and told Royce Grady to his face that he'd made a mistake. He turned his hat one last time. I've been in this town for 30 years. I've never seen anyone do that and still be standing by after noon. He set the hat on his knee. So either you're very stupid or you're something else. And you don't strike me as stupid. Jack picked up the envelope, held it, felt the weight of what it was and what it meant, and what it was going to cost someone to do anything with it. This goes to the federal marshal's office, he said, not the territorial federal. Direct. Grady has no reach there. How do you get it there without Grady knowing? Carefully, Jack said, and not alone. He thought about Maggie, about the survey document with R.P. Aldridge's signature, about the copies in Santa Fe that Daniel had made sure were filed, about 14 months of a woman holding a diner together with steady hands and a jaw that didn't break. He thought about what she'd said. He was very careful. Daniel Harlow had been careful. He'd left a trail, the Santa Fe copies, the marker in the creek bed, the conversation with Earl. Not because he'd known he was going to die, but because he was a man who understood that the truth needed more than one road to travel on. His wife was the same kind of careful. Jack just needed her to let him show her what she was already carrying. One more thing, Earl said. Jack looked up. Buck Malone wasn't always like this, Earl said. His voice had changed, less flat, more tired. The specific tiredness of a man talking about something he'd watched happen and hadn't been able to stop. He came here 5 years ago. Young Deputy Green wanted to do right. Good instincts. He paused. Grady worked on him slow. Small things first. Look the other way here. File the report this way, not that way. Each thing small enough to say yes to, until the yes was a habit and the no was gone. He looked at Jack. I'm not asking you to go easy on him. I'm just telling you he's not the thing he became on purpose. Jack thought about that. Doesn't change what he is now, he said. No, Earl agreed. It doesn't. He stood, put his hat on. But it changes how you read him. Sometimes the ones who became something on accident are more useful than the ones who chose it. He left without another word. Jack sat alone with the letter and the gathering dark outside his window, and the sound of Red Rock settling into evening, the distant clang from the smithy voices from the saloon 2 streets over, somewhere, a dog somewhere, a child called in for supper. Ordinary sounds. A town living its ordinary life around the machinery of what Grady had built inside it. He thought about Friday. 2 days now. Maggie was going to refuse again. He was certain of that. She was not the kind of woman who changed a decision because a situation became dangerous. If anything, danger made her hold tighter. He'd seen it in the way she'd gripped the counter, the way she'd said 14 months without flinching, the way she'd sent him to get those documents without a second hesitation once she'd made up her mind. She'd made up her mind a long time ago. She was just waiting for the ground to hold. He spread Earl's letter open on the cot beside the survey document from Maggie's box, and he sat on the floor in the last of the daylight, and he read everything twice, and then a third time, and by the time he was done, the room was dark, and his back ached, and he had the shape of it in his mind. Not all of it, not enough yet, but enough to see what it was. What Grady had built wasn't just corruption. It was architecture. Years of it layered and load-bearing each piece, supporting the next, the whole thing designed to look like the natural order of a frontier valley from the outside and be something entirely different within. To bring it down, you didn't push on the facade. You pulled the foundation. The foundation was a letter in a dead man's file in the territorial office in Santa Fe, and a survey marker in a creek bed, and a woman who had been standing on the truth for 14 months without knowing exactly what she was standing on. Jack folded both documents carefully, tucked them inside his coat against his chest. He sat for a while in the dark. He thought about Ellie again, couldn't help it, didn't try to stop it this time. He thought about the particular courage of women who hold things together after the men in their lives have failed them, or left them, or simply been taken. The specific exhausted strength of it. The way it looked like stubbornness from the outside, because stubbornness was easier for people to name than what it actually was. Survival dressed in whatever clothes were available. He hadn't protected his daughter. That was the truth of it, simple, unadorned. He'd ridden away when she was 11 years old, and told himself it was for her sake, and the lie had been so convenient that he'd nearly believed it. Nearly. He couldn't go back and change the shape of what he'd done. But he was here now. He was awake now. And in 2 days, Royce Grady was coming back to Harlow's diner. Jack intended to be ready. Thursday came in cold and mean, the kind of morning that made Red Rock feel smaller than it was, the buildings pressed together against the wind, the people moving faster with their heads down, not looking at each other more than necessary. Jack was at the diner before Maggie unlocked the front door. She found him on the boardwalk when she came around from the back, and she stopped for just a moment, not surprised exactly, but registering something. The fact of him being there. The deliberateness of it. "You're early," she said. "I need to show you something," he said, "before the morning rush." She unlocked the door without another word and held it open. Inside, she lit the lamp and started the coffee, and didn't ask him to wait while she did it, which he appreciated. When she finally turned and leaned against the counter with her arms crossed and her eyes steady, he laid both documents on the table in front of her. Earl's letter first, then the old survey report with R.P. Aldridge's signature. He watched her read. She was fast, faster than he'd expected. Her eyes moved across the page with the focused efficiency of a woman who had spent years managing accounts, reading contracts, understanding what words on paper actually meant versus what people told her they meant. She finished the letter, set it down, picked up the survey report. Read it twice. Then she stood very still. "Valley Water Associates," she said. "Incorporated 1878, Jack said. Under Grady's mother's name. She died in 82. Controlling interest transferred to her estate. Which Royce inherited." "Which Royce inherited," he confirmed. "Along with the water rights to land that the territorial government has been calling public domain for 15 years. Maggie set the survey report down with the particular care of someone handling something that might detonate. She looked at him. "Daniel found the survey marker," she said. It wasn't a question. She was putting it together herself piece by piece, and he let her. "Earl told me last night," Jack said. "Daniel came to him about 6 months before he died. He'd seen the marker after the rain dropped the creek level. He was going to write to Santa Fe." "He did write to Santa Fe," Maggie said. Jack went still. "He sent the letter 2 weeks before he died," she continued. Her voice was flat and controlled, and underneath it, something was moving, something large and pressurized like water behind a cracking dam. "I found it in his desk after a copy he'd kept. I didn't know what it meant at the time. I didn't know what he'd found. She looked at the documents on the table, put it in the box with everything else, because Daniel kept things for reasons even when he didn't explain them. Is the copy still in the box? Jack asked. At the house, she said. I need to see it, he said. Today. She nodded once. Then something shifted in her face. Not collapse, but the particular expression of a woman who has just understood the full weight of what she's been carrying without knowing she was carrying it. He knew, she said quietly. He knew what he'd found, and he knew what it meant, and he still... She stopped. Her jaw tightened. He didn't tell me because he didn't want me to be afraid. He was trying to protect you, Jack said. He got himself killed trying to protect me, she said. Not bitter, just exact. The precision of a woman who had been living with an incomplete picture for 14 months and had just received the piece that made the image whole and terrible. Jack didn't offer comfort. She wasn't asking for it, and offering it would have been a reduction of what she was feeling into something manageable and small. He let it be what it was. After a moment, she straightened, untied and retied her apron, the gesture he was starting to recognize as her version of a deep breath. Tonight, she said, after closing, come to the house. All right, he said. She picked up the documents and folded them and handed them back to him. Her fingers were steady. Don't let anyone see those, she said. I know. The door opened. Cody came in stamping cold off his boots, and the morning began. The trouble arrived at 10:30 in the form of Buck Malone and two men Jack didn't recognize. They didn't come into the diner. They stood on the boardwalk outside, and they didn't do anything specific, just stood there talking among themselves, positioned, so that anyone inside could see them clearly through the window. Cody saw them first and went quiet, in the specific way of someone trying to make himself invisible. The two ranch hands at the back table exchanged a look and found reasons to finish their coffee quickly. Maggie saw them too. Jack watched her see them, the slight pause in motion, the way her chin came up fractionally, the decision she made in about 2 seconds to keep moving as if they weren't there. He stayed at his table. Buck glanced through the window once, made eye contact with Jack for exactly 1 second, then looked away. The message was clear, architectural in its simplicity. We are here. We are watching. We can do this all day. It was a pressure tactic. Not violence, not yet, but the suggestion of violence, the implication of it, designed to make Maggie feel the walls of her life growing smaller. Designed to make the diner feel less like her place, and more like a place she was permitted to be in temporarily at someone else's discretion. Jack understood the tactic because he'd seen it used before. He'd used it himself once in a different life. The memory of that sat in him like a coal not quite burning, but warm and uncomfortable, in ways that didn't let him forget it was there. He got up and refilled his own coffee and sat back down and didn't look at the window again. 40 minutes later, Buck and his men moved on. Cody exhaled. The ranch hands relaxed. The diner resumed breathing. Maggie came by with the pot without commenting. When she refilled his cup, she set a folded piece of paper on the table beside it, a small, quiet motion that no one in the room would have noticed. He waited until she moved away before he opened it. 3 words in her handwriting. He came yesterday. Jack turned the paper over and wrote 2 words back. I know. He left it on the table when he paid. She picked it up without looking at it and was already moving toward the kitchen before she had it in her apron pocket. He found Earl at the saloon before noon. Buck's watching the diner, Jack said. I heard, Earl said. He brought Decker and Fossey. Decker's a hired hand, been with Grady 2 years. Fossey is newer, came up from Tucson. Nobody knows his particulars. He poured himself a glass of water, which told Jack the old man's nerves were worse than he was showing. Earl didn't drink water at his own bar, unless something had him genuinely unsettled. Grady's moving up the timeline. Why? Jack asked. He told Maggie Friday. Today's Thursday. Because you're here, Earl said simply. He doesn't know what you are yet, but he knows you're something, and something he can't identify is more dangerous to a man like Grady than something he can. He set the glass down. He wants her rattled before Friday, wants her to come to him instead of making him come back to her. Woman walks into the land office and asks to negotiate. She's already lost half her ground. She won't, Jack said. No, Earl agreed. She won't, but Grady doesn't know that yet. He looked at Jack carefully. What are you planning? I need to get the documents to the federal marshal's office in Tucson, Jack said. Quietly, before Friday. If Grady moves against Maggie before those papers are in federal hands, we're fighting on his ground. Tucson is 2 days' hard ride, Earl said. You can't go yourself, Grady's watching you. And if he sees you leave town, I'm not going, Jack said. I need someone he won't watch. Earl was quiet for a moment. Cody, Jack said. Earl looked at him sharply. He's 22 years old. He's 22 years old, and nobody in this town pays him any attention, which makes him the most useful person available, Jack said. I need a rider who can leave before dawn without being noticed and reach Tucson inside of 2 days. Cody knows this territory. He rides fast. He held Earl's gaze. I'll give him everything he needs. Instructions contacts the documents themselves, copies not originals. The originals stay with Maggie. Earl turned his glass in a slow circle, thinking, You'd be putting a boy in the middle of this, he said. I know, Jack said. I'd rather not. I don't have a better option. What if Grady finds out? Then we're in trouble, Jack said. But we're already in trouble. The question is whether we're in trouble with federal eyes on it or not. Earl absorbed this, set the glass down. I'll talk to him, he said finally. It should come from me. He trusts me. Tonight, Jack said. He needs to ride before sunrise. Tonight, Earl confirmed. Jack turned to go, got 2 steps toward the door. Callahan, Earl said. He stopped. What did you do? Earl asked. Before. The things you said you weren't proud of. He wasn't being accusatory. The question was too quiet for that, too careful. He was asking because it mattered to how he trusted what Jack was asking of him. I think I need to know. Jack stood with his back still partly to the old man. He considered not answering. He'd gotten good at not answering that question. But Earl had handed him a letter he'd been sitting on for 14 months. Earl was going to send a 22-year-old boy into the dark with federal documents. Earl deserved the truth. I rode with a company that acquired land, Jack said. In New Mexico mostly, some in Texas. We didn't always acquire it clean. He paused. We used the law when the law cooperated. When it didn't, we used other things. Another pause. I told myself for years that I was just the scout, just the man who found the ground and read it and reported back. That the decisions about what happened after weren't mine. He turned slightly. I was lying to myself. I knew what I was scouting for. I knew what would happen to the people already on that land. I did it anyway because I was paid well and because... He stopped. Because it was easier than not doing it. Earl looked at him steadily. And then, he said. And then I watched something happen that I couldn't file away under someone else's decision, Jack said. And I stopped. He met the old man's eyes. That's the whole of it. Earl nodded slowly. Once. All right, he said. Tonight. Maggie's house was a 10-minute walk from the diner, and Jack made it in 8, moving fast through streets gone quiet with early dark. She answered his knock before he'd finished knocking. She'd been listening for it. Inside was small and neat and more personal than the diner, which made sense. The diner was her armor. The house was what she was protecting. She had the box on the kitchen table already. And on top of it, separate a single folded letter. She handed it to him. He read it standing up because sitting down would have taken a second he didn't want to waste. Daniel Harlow had written clearly and without drama. A man making a report precise and orderly, the survey marker he'd found the date, the location, the Aldridge stamp, the coordinates. his cross-reference with the public domain listing in the territorial records, his suspicion that the land had been improperly transferred, his request that the Santa Fe hold the original incorporation documents for Valley Water Associates and compare them against the current ownership records for the Cartwright Creek water rights. At the bottom, in slightly different ink, added later. Jack judged maybe a day or two after the rest. I have reason to believe that Sheriff R. Grady may have a financial interest in this matter. I am sharing this information with 2 trusted individuals locally, in the event that anything should happen to me before Santa Fe responds. I am not a man given to drama. I am simply a man who believes the truth is worth more than the discomfort of speaking it. Jack lowered the letter. The room was very quiet. He knew, Jack said. Yes, Maggie said. He knew something might happen to him, and he still filed the letter. Yes. Her voice was even. It cost her something to keep it that way. He could see the cost in the line of her shoulders, in the way she was standing very straight and very still, the posture of a woman who has decided that she is not going to come apart in front of anyone, and has been deciding that every single day for 14 months. He was a brave man, Jack said. He was a stubborn one, she said. A beat. We had that in common. Something moved in her eyes, then quick and private, a flash of something that might have been memory, or grief, or the specific pain of loving someone past the point where you can reach them. She looked away. The 2 trusted individuals, Jack said. One was Earl. Yes? Who was the second? Maggie turned back to him. Me, she said. He told me the night before he died. Not everything, not the survey marker, not the letter. But he told me that he'd found something, and that if anything happened to him, I should look in the box. She looked at the box on the table. I looked in the box. I had a box full of documents I didn't fully understand, and a dead husband and a sheriff making me offers, and no one I could safely ask for help. Her jaw worked once. So I just held on to it, and kept the diner running, and waited. For what? Jack asked quietly. I don't know, she said. Something to change. Someone to show up who... She stopped. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Jack set the letter down beside the others on the table. He looked at the arrangement of papers, the survey report, Earl's letter, Daniel's letter, the deed, documents, the territorial filing confirmations, and he saw what they made together. Not just evidence. A case. A carefully built case that a dead man had assembled against his own murderers before they got to him, spread across multiple locations and multiple people, precisely so that no single act of violence could erase it. Daniel Harlow had been more than careful. He'd been brilliant. I need to make copies of this letter, Jack said. Tonight. And I need to add it to the packet going to Tucson with Cody. Cody? She repeated. Earl's talking to him now. He rides before dawn. Maggie was quiet for a moment. Then, he's just a boy. He's the only one Grady isn't watching, Jack said. And he cares about you. Earl says he's been coming to the diner every Tuesday since before Daniel died. He met her eyes. Sometimes the person who loves you plainly and without agenda is exactly who you need. She absorbed that, looked at the table, made a decision. I have paper and ink in the desk, she said. I'll write the copy. My handwriting's faster than yours. How do you know that? Because you hold a pen the way a man holds a gun, she said, like it might resist you. He almost smiled. She didn't see it, she was already moving toward the desk, but he thought maybe she knew it anyway. She wrote fast and clean, transcribing Daniel's letter word for word, and he watched her do it, and felt something settle in him that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not peace, not yet, not with what was coming, but the particular solidity of a thing that has been drifting, finding ground to stand on. She finished, sanded the ink dry, folded it. There's something else, she said. She reached back into the box and produced a small leather-bound notebook. She held it for a moment before handing it over, the pause of someone releasing something they've been gripping for a long time. Daniel's survey notes, she said. He kept everything. Every measurement he took near Cartwright Creek going back 2 years. The marker he found is in there with exact coordinates, sketch and all. She met Jack's eyes. I didn't know if it was useful. I didn't know if any of it was useful. I just couldn't throw anything away. Jack opened the notebook. The sketch was precise. A hand drawn in quick, confident lines, the kind made by someone who'd spent years making field notes, a man who understood that measurements existed to be read later by someone who hadn't been there. The survey marker was drawn from 2 angles. The Aldridge stamp rendered in careful detail. The coordinates written twice, once in pencil and once in ink. Daniel Harlow had documented everything. He'd known on some level that he wasn't going to be there to explain it himself. Jack closed the notebook gently. This goes with Cody, he said. This is the piece that makes everything else undeniable. A physical marker documented in the field with coordinates that anyone can write out and verify. He looked up. This is the foundation, Mrs. Harlow. This is what Grady's been trying to bury for 2 years. Maggie stood very straight. My name is Maggie, she said. If we're going to do whatever it is we're about to do, you can call me Maggie. All right, he said. Maggie, she nodded once, businesslike, moved back to the table and began organizing the documents with quick, certain hands. The survey report, the letters, the deed filings, the notebook, sorting them into 2 stacks, originals and copies. Her hands knew what they were doing. This was a woman who had managed accounts and contracts and inventory for years, who understood that order and paperwork was not fussiness, but function. The originals stay here, she said, hidden not in the box. I know a place in the floorboard Grady's men have already searched once. They won't think to look twice. She looked up. The copies go with Cody. If something happens to Cody... Nothing's going to happen to Cody, Jack said. If something happens to Cody... She repeated with the patient firmness of a woman who does not accept comfortable reassurances when she can have a contingency plan. Instead, where do we stand? Jack thought for a moment. Santa Fe, he said. Daniel's original letter is already there in the Territorial Records Office, logged as received. The question is whether anyone there has acted on it. He paused. 14 months, and no one's come to the valley. Which means either the letter was buried, or the person who received it is connected to Grady somehow, or it's still sitting in a pile waiting for someone to look at it, Maggie said. Which is why we go around the Territorial office entirely, Jack said. Federal Marshal, direct. Grady has reach in the territorial system. He's been operating in it for years, but the federal office in Tucson operates under a different authority, different chain of command. Do you know someone there? He did. Whether that someone would be glad to hear from him was a separate question. A man named Holt, Jack said. Federal Deputy Marshal. I did some work for him years ago. Legal work, before you ask. A beat. Mostly. Maggie looked at him steadily. Mostly, she repeated. Mostly, he confirmed. Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but the direction of one. The first he'd seen from her, even at that incomplete degree, and it did something unexpected to the quality of the air in the room. He looked back at the documents. I'll write a letter for Cody to carry alongside the evidence, he said, addressed to Holt, explaining what we have and what we need. Will he act on it? If the evidence is what I think it is, yes. He glanced up. Federal marshals like clean cases. Cases that come with documentation, field records, witness accounts. Cases where the work is already done, and they just need to ride in with the authority to make it official. He spread his hand over the organized papers. Daniel gave us a clean case. We just need to deliver it to someone with the right badge. Maggie looked at the papers. At 14 months of her dead husband's careful work assembled and sorted on her kitchen table. He would have been glad, she said quietly, that someone was finally reading it. Jack said nothing, because nothing was the right answer. He pulled out the chair at the table and sat down and began to write the letter to Holt. Maggie sat at the other end of the table and worked by lamplight on a careful inventory of every document in both stacks, noting what each was and what it proved, so that when Cody arrived in Tucson, he could answer any question Holt put to him without fumbling. They worked in silence for a while. A companionable silence, not empty, but full of the particular shared focus of two people doing necessary things in the same space. Then Maggie said, without looking up from her writing, "Why did you come to Red Rock?" He kept writing. "I told you, drifting." "Men drift to places for reasons," she said. "Even when they're running from something. The thing they're running from points them somewhere." He was quiet for a moment. "My daughter," he said finally. "She's in Colorado, or she was last I heard." He paused. "I don't know if I was going toward her or away from her. I'm not sure there's a difference at a certain distance." Maggie looked up from her writing. Just briefly. Long enough to let him know she'd heard it, the full weight of it, not just the words. "How long since you've seen her?" she asked. 15 years. She didn't say anything, but she didn't look away either. And somehow the not saying and the not looking away were both exactly the right response. "She became a doctor," he said. "Someone told me that. I had nothing to do with it." "Doesn't mean you can't be proud of it," Maggie said. "Doesn't mean I get to be," he said. She considered that. Then she said quietly, "Maybe you get to earn it back. Not the credit, not the right to claim it, but the right to stand somewhere near her again." She returned to her writing. "That's not nothing." Jack didn't answer. He finished the letter to Holt. He read it once, then again, made one correction, folded it into the packet with the copied documents and the notebook. He was tying the packet closed when the knock came at the door. Both of them went still. 3 knocks. A pause. 2 more. Maggie let out a breath. She went to the door and opened it. Cody stood on the step, hat in his hands, looking young and serious and slightly terrified in the way of someone who has just been told they matter to something important. "Earl said you needed me," he said. Maggie stepped back to let him in. He came into the lamplight and looked at the table, at the documents and the packet and the careful organization of a case against the most powerful man in the valley, and something in his young face shifted from terrified to resolved. "What do I need to do?" he asked. "Sit down," Jack said. "I'll tell you exactly." And he did. All of it: where to go, who to ask for, what to say, what not to say. What to do if anyone stopped him on the road. What to do if Holt wasn't there. What to do if Holt refused. He covered every contingency he could think of, and Cody listened with the focused attention of a young man who understood, perhaps for the first time, that he was being trusted with something that weighed more than himself. When Jack finished, Cody looked at the packet for a long moment. Then he looked at Maggie. "He didn't deserve what happened to him," Cody said, meaning Daniel. "Mr. Harlow, he was always decent to me." Maggie's throat moved. "I know," she said. "Thank you, Cody." Cody tucked the packet inside his coat, stood up, put his hat back on with the specific care of someone who has just taken on a responsibility they intend to honor. "I'll be gone before 4, he said. "Back inside 2 days." He looked at Jack. "You'll watch out for her while I'm gone." "Yes," Jack said. Cody nodded, went to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. "One more thing," he said. He was looking at Maggie. "When this is done, whatever happens, don't sell the diner. This town needs it." A beat. "We need you in it." He left before she could answer. The door closed. The lamplight settled. Maggie stood with her hands at her sides, and her eyes bright, and her jaw set, and her whole self arranged around the effort of staying in one piece, which she was managing barely through the kind of will that looks like calm from the outside and feels like holding back a river from within. Jack looked at the empty doorway where Cody had been. He thought about what Earl had said the night before: the ones who became something on accident are sometimes more useful than the ones who chose it. He'd been talking about Buck Malone, but he might as easily have been talking about Cody going the other direction. A boy who'd never been asked to be brave before choosing it in a quiet kitchen over a kitchen table covered in dead man's paperwork. It was enough to make a person believe in something. He wasn't ready to name what. "Tomorrow's Friday," Maggie said. "Yes." Jack said. She looked at him with those dark, steady eyes. "He'll come in the morning," she said. "He always does the hard things in the morning, while people are still soft from sleep." "I know," Jack said. "I'm not going to sell," she said. "I want you to know that. Whatever he brings with him tomorrow, I'm not going to sell, and I'm not going to run, and I'm not going to give him the satisfaction of watching me be afraid." Her voice was level and entirely without bravado. Not a performance of courage, but the plain statement of a woman who has already made her peace with what courage costs. "I just want you to know that going in." Jack looked at her for a moment. "I know," he said, for the third time, but differently than the first two times. She held his gaze for a beat longer than necessary. Then she began clearing the table. Jack picked up his hat. He had one more thing to do before morning. He had to find Buck Malone. Buck Malone was not hard to find. He was at the Dusty Spur, same as most nights, but tonight he was alone at a corner table and not drinking the way a man drinks when he's relaxed. He was drinking the way a man drinks when he's trying to get something quiet that won't quiet down. His glass was mostly full, and he kept turning it without lifting it, a slow rotation that said more about where his mind was than any words would have. Jack walked in, crossed the room without looking at the bar, and sat down across from Buck before the deputy had time to arrange his face into the pleasant professional mask he'd been wearing at their last conversation. For one unguarded second, Buck Malone looked exactly like what Earl had described: a young man who had said yes to one small thing, too many, and was now standing inside a version of himself he hadn't chosen and couldn't easily leave. Then the mask came back up. "Callahan?" he said. "You've got nerve sitting down uninvited twice in 2 days." "I sat down uninvited once," Jack said. "You sat down uninvited the first time. I'm returning the courtesy." Buck looked at him, set the glass down. "What do you want?" "To talk," Jack said. "Not as your problem, not as Grady's problem. As one man to another who's been in a bad situation and knows what the walls of it feel like." Something moved through Buck's expression, fast and quickly controlled, like a fish breaking the surface and diving back down before you could be sure you'd seen it. "I don't know what you think you know about my situation," Buck said carefully. "I know you came to that saloon yesterday on your lunch hour without your badge showing," Jack said. "I know Grady sent you, but he sent you unofficial, which means he didn't want it documented. I know you're sitting here tonight alone, which you don't do when things are going the way you want them to." He held Buck's gaze. "And I know that whatever Grady's planning for tomorrow, he hasn't told you all of it. Because men like Grady never tell the people below them all of it. They tell them enough to be useful and not enough to be dangerous." Buck was very still. "That's a lot of knowing for a drifter," he said. "I wasn't always drifting," Jack said. A long silence stretched between them. The saloon was quiet tonight. 3 men at the bar, none paying attention to the corner table. Earl behind the counter, moving glasses with the deliberate patience of a man giving 2 other men room to say what they needed to say. Buck picked up his glass, drank, set it down. "What do you want from me?" he said. Quieter now, the pleasantness entirely gone, which made him seem younger, more real. "Information," Jack said. "What is Grady planning for tomorrow?" "I can't tell you that." "Can't or won't?" Buck's jaw tightened. "Both." "All right," Jack said. "Then let me tell you what I already know, and you tell me if I'm wrong." He leaned forward slightly, voice dropping further. "Grady doesn't just want the diner. He wants the water rights on the Harlow land, which are connected to a fraudulent land transfer he's been hiding since 1878 under his mother's name. He had Daniel Harlow killed because Daniel found the original survey marker and was going to the territorial office with it. He's been making offers to Maggie for 14 months because the cleanest way to bury the evidence is to own the land and control who goes near that creek." He paused. "How am I doing?" Buck had gone the color of old ash. "Where did you get that?" he said. Not a question, barely even words. "Does it matter?" "It matters because if Grady finds out anyone's been talking..." He stopped himself, looked at the table. "Who would he go after?" Jack asked. "Earl Maggie." He kept his voice even. You. Buck didn't answer. Which was its own answer. Buck, Jack said. And it was the first time he'd used the man's given name, and the shift in register was deliberate, a door opening instead of a wall shelf. How long have you known about Daniel Harlow? The silence this time was different, heavier. I ran the inquiry, Buck said finally. His voice had dropped to something almost inaudible. Writing accident. 2 days case closed. Grady told me what to find and I found it. He turned the glass. I knew it wasn't right. I knew the minute I saw the bank where he supposedly fell, the ground was wrong, the angle was wrong. A man who knew that land like Daniel Harlow did not fall off that bank on his own. He stopped turning the glass. I wrote it up the way I was told, and I have been living with that for 14 months. The words came out like something that had been stuck for a long time and had finally found the pressure it needed to move. Jack let the quiet hold for a moment. Then help me, he said. Buck looked up. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking, Jack said. I'm asking you to do the thing you should have done 14 months ago. Not because it's easy, not because it's safe. Because a woman named Maggie Harlow has been holding that diner together alone since her husband was murdered, and tomorrow, Grady's going to walk in there and do something that ends her ability to fight back, and the only way to stop that is to know what he's planning before he does it. Buck stared at the table for a long time. There's a buyer, he said at last. Coming in from Tucson. Real estate man works for the railroad. The railroad's been looking at routes through this territory, and Cartwright Creek is the only reliable water source on the southern pass. He paused. Grady arranged the meeting 3 weeks ago. The buyer arrives tomorrow afternoon. Grady wants the Harlow deed in hand before that meeting. Clean title, no disputes. What happens if Maggie refuses again tomorrow? Buck's mouth pressed into a thin line. Grady's not asking anymore. The words landed like stones in still water. He's going to take it, Jack said. He's got a document, Buck said. From Thomas Aldridge. A resurvey report dated last month claiming the original Harlow deed contains a boundary error that puts a third of the property in dispute. It's fabricated. I've seen the original survey. There's no error, but Aldridge signed it with the county seal. Grady's going to present it to Maggie as a legal notice, give her 24 hours to vacate the disputed portion, and use the legal confusion to block any sale or transfer she might try to make in the meantime. And if she goes to a lawyer, nearest lawyer not in Grady's pocket is in Tucson, Buck said. 2 days away. By the time she gets representation, the railroad meeting is done and the deal is signed. Jack sat with that for a moment. The clean, interlocking machinery of it. Grady hadn't panicked when Jack stood up in the diner on Tuesday. He'd accelerated. He'd moved his timeline, fabricated his legal cover, positioned his buyer. He'd been running this play for weeks. Jack's presence had just forced him to run it faster. The resurvey document, Jack said. Does it exist in the county records yet? Aldridge files it this morning, Buck said. Early, before the land office opens to the public. Is it already filed? Buck checked the watch on his vest. Probably. Jack stood up. I need you to do one thing, he said. One thing, Buck. That's all. Buck looked up at him with the eyes of a man standing at the edge of something he's been circling for a long time. When Grady comes into that diner tomorrow, Jack said, I need you to stay outside. Buck stared at him. That's it, he said. That's it, Jack said. Don't go in with him. Whatever he tells you to do, find a reason to be on the boardwalk. Can you do that? Why? Because what happens inside that diner tomorrow needs witnesses, Jack said. And a witness who's also a deputy, even one who's been compromised, is worth more than no witness at all. He held the young man's gaze. You're not a bad man, Buck. You made bad choices. There's still a difference. But only if you act like there's still a difference. Buck was quiet for a very long time. Grady's going to know, he said. Eventually. He's going to know I talked to you. Eventually, Jack agreed, but by then it won't matter. He left Buck sitting at the corner table with his mostly full glass and the weight of 14 months pressing down on him from every direction. And he walked out into the cold night and stood on the boardwalk for a moment, looking up at a sky full of stars going about their indifferent business. And he thought about what was coming in the morning with the particular focused calm of a man who has accepted that the next 24 hours are going to be the most important of the last 4 years. He went back to his room. He did not sleep. He sat at the window until the first gray edge of dawn touched the eastern sky, and then he dressed carefully and put Earl's letter and Maggie's copies in a secure place in his coat, and settled his hat on his head and walked down the stairs and out into the beginning of Friday. He was at the diner at 6. Maggie was already there. She looked at him when he came through the door the way she'd been looking at him since Tuesday, directly fully without the peripheral carefulness she'd maintained before, and he thought that whatever was going to happen today, at least they were both going into it clear-eyed. "Cody got out," she said. "Before 4 like he said. I heard his horse." "Good," Jack said. "He'll be in Tucson by tomorrow morning if he pushes through." "He'll push through," Jack said. He sat at his table. She brought coffee without being asked, same as every morning, except nothing was the same as every morning. "Grady's bringing a legal document, fabricated resurvey, claiming a boundary error on your deed. It's already filed with Aldridge's office." Maggie set the coffee pot down with a care that suggested she was putting considerable effort into not setting it down harder. "When did you find this out?" she said. "Last night." "Buck Malone." "Yes." She absorbed this, sat down across from him, same as the morning with the documents, now a habit neither of them had remarked upon. "What does the document do?" "Puts 1/3 of your property in legal dispute. Blocks any transfer or sale you might try to make while the dispute is unresolved. Buys Grady time to close a deal with a railroad buyer coming in from Tucson this afternoon." He kept his voice even. "Facts, not alarm." She needed facts. "The dispute is fabricated. Aldridge created it with the county seal, which is fraud, which is federal territory, the moment we have a federal officer to present it to. But we don't have one yet," Maggie said. "Cody won't reach Holt until tomorrow at the earliest." "No," Jack said. "We don't have one yet. So today we buy time," Jack said. "We don't let Grady panic you or force you into a response that closes your options. Whatever he presents, whatever he says, you acknowledge receipt and nothing else. No signature, no agreement, no concession." "I know how to say no," Maggie said. "I know you do," Jack said. "I'm saying it for my benefit as much as yours." Something in her expression shifted the very edge of that not-quite smile again. Then it was gone, replaced by the serious calm she'd been wearing all morning. "What about you?" she said. "What about me? What are you going to do when he comes in?" "Whatever needs doing," he said. "That's not an answer." "It's the only honest one I have," he said. "I don't know what he'll bring with him. I know what I'll do if he keeps it to words and paper. I know what I'll do if he doesn't." She looked at him steadily. "I don't want anyone hurt on my account." "I know." "I mean it, Jack." His name in her mouth landed differently than he'd expected. Quietly, like a door opening to a room he'd forgotten existed. "I know you mean it," he said. "But some things aren't entirely up to the people they're on account of." She held his gaze for another moment. Then she stood and went back behind the counter because the morning wasn't going to run itself, and Maggie Harlow had never once in her life allowed what was coming to stop her from handling what was here. The diner filled at its usual pace. Cody's absence was noted by no one out loud, but Jack saw Maggie register it, the empty Tuesday table, the untouched seat, and he saw her file it away, under the same careful discipline she applied to everything. At 9 o'clock, Earl came in. He didn't sit. He went to the counter and ordered coffee. He didn't drink and leaned close to Maggie and said something quiet. She nodded once. He left. Jack looked at her when Earl was gone. She met his eyes across the room, mouthed 2 words. "He's coming." Jack set down his cup. He checked the distance from his table to the door. 12 feet. To the counter, 8. He noted the position of the 2 ranch hands at the back, different men than Tuesday, but same type, the kind who wouldn't intervene but wouldn't be in the way either. He noted the woman reading a letter alone near the window, who would need to be somewhere other than near the window if things deteriorated. He settled back in his chair. He breathed. He waited. Grady came through the door at 9:14. He came with Decky behind him, the two men from the boardwalk yesterday, and the change from Tuesday was immediately apparent to anyone paying attention. On Tuesday, Grady had come alone, which was arrogance. Today, he'd brought men, which was something else, planning or fear or both wearing each other's clothes. He crossed the room to the counter. He was carrying a leather document folder. He set it on the counter in front of Maggie, with the flat deliberateness of a man playing a card he's certain about. "Mrs. Harlow," he said. "Pleasant as always. I'm afraid there's a complication with your property." Maggie looked at the folder, did not touch it, looked back up at Grady. "Good morning, Sheriff," she said. He opened the folder himself, slid the document toward her. She looked down at it without touching it, reading from where she stood. Jack watched her face from across the room. She was processing fast, line by line, and he could see the moment she understood what she was reading, because her jaw tightened exactly once and then deliberately released. "A boundary dispute," she said. "A surveying error in your original deed," Grady said. "Identified by the county land commissioner in a routine re-examination. Standard procedure." He spread his hands. "I'm sure it's an inconvenience, but these things happen. The disputed portion is currently frozen pending resolution." "Who authorized the re-examination?" Maggie asked. Grady paused, just briefly. "The county land office conducts routine." "Which is Thomas Aldridge's office," Maggie said. "Your brother-in-law." A beat of silence. "That's not a relevant consideration," Grady said. His pleasant voice had developed an edge the way a good knife develops a nick when it strikes something harder than expected. "I think it's extremely relevant," Maggie said. She still hadn't touched the document. "I'd like to have this examined by an independent surveyor before I acknowledge any dispute." "You have 24 hours to..." "I have the right to legal counsel and independent verification before signing or acknowledging anything," Maggie said. "That's territorial law, Sheriff, even out here." Grady's jaw moved. Jack was on his feet. Not fast, never fast, but already moving when Grady took the half-step that closed the distance between him and the counter. The half-step that said the pleasantness was done, and what came after it wouldn't be filed under conversation. "Mrs. Harlow," Grady said, and his voice had dropped to something private and cold. "I have been patient with you for 14 months. I have made you 4 reasonable offers. I have given you every courtesy available to me. What's happening now is not a request." "Take your hands off the counter," Jack said. He was 6 feet away. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. Grady turned. Decker and Fossey moved just slightly, the professional adjustment of men positioning themselves. Jack noted it without looking directly at them, the peripheral awareness of someone who had spent years knowing where the threat was without announcing that he knew. "Callahan," Grady said. His voice was very quiet. "You are making the worst mistake of your life." "I've made worse," Jack said. None of them involved standing still while a woman was threatened in her own place. He kept his eyes on Grady. "The document on that counter is fraudulent. The resurvey was conducted by a county commissioner with a documented financial interest in this property. That makes it fraud, which makes it a federal matter, not territorial." He let that sit for exactly 1 second. "The federal marshal's office in Tucson is already aware." The room went very still. Not the scared stillness of Tuesday. Something different. The stillness of people who had been holding their breath for a long time and had just heard something that made them wonder if breathing might be possible again. Grady stared at Jack with those pale eyes. "You're bluffing," he said. "I reckon you could assume that," Jack said, "and wait and see. Or you could look at the evidence and make a better decision." He tilted his head slightly. "Evidence like an 1877 survey report signed by R.P. Aldridge establishing the Cartwright Creek water rights." Evidence like an incorporation document for Valley Water Associates registered under your mother's name in 1878, which transferred the controlling interest in those same water rights to her estate and subsequently to you. He paused. Evidence like the field notes and survey coordinates from a man named Daniel Harlow documented 2 years ago and sent to the territorial office in Santa Fe describing the original survey marker he found in that creek bed. One more pause. The one you killed him to stop him from reporting. The color left Grady's face, not slowly, all at once like a lamp going out. Decker took a step toward Jack. Just one. Don't, Jack said. He didn't look at Decker. He said it the way you say something true, without emphasis, without drama, with complete certainty. Decker stopped. Fosse had gone very still. In the doorway, not in the room. Boot heels on the boardwalk, and nothing more. Buck Malone standing outside as Jack had asked hand on his own doorframe, not entering, not leaving bearing witness to a scene that was arranging itself into something he would have to testify to eventually, and seemed to know it. Grady looked at Jack. For the first time in as long as anyone in Red Rock could probably remember, Royce Grady looked at someone and did not find the ground where he expected it to be. "Whatever you think you have," he started. "You should go," Jack said. "Today, before the federal marshal arrives. That's not advice. That's the clearest thing I can tell you." "You don't have the authority." "No," Jack agreed. "But Marshal Holt does, and he's going to have everything I described with documentation and field evidence inside of 48 hours. He held Grady's gaze. "You built something here, I know that. 9 years of structure carefully done. But Daniel Harlow was more careful. He let that land. He left a record that goes further back than you planned for. That's not something you can resurvey your way out of." Grady's breath came out slow and audible through his nose. He looked at Maggie. She was looking back at him with those dark, steady eyes. Both hands flat on the counter, chin level. The same posture she'd had on Tuesday, except Tuesday, she'd been keeping herself together against impact. And today, she was just standing there. Still. Certain. Like a woman who had decided a long time ago that this was her counter and her diner and her land, and she was not moving. Grady picked up the document folder. He closed it. He looked at Jack one more time. "You have no idea what you've started," he said. "I think Daniel Harlow started it," Jack said. "I'm just finishing what he left." Grady walked to the door. Decker and Fosse fell in behind him, the automatic choreography of men following, because following is what they do. At the door, Grady paused. Didn't turn around. "This isn't over," he said. "I know," Jack said. The door closed. The sound of spurs faded. Nobody in the diner moved for a full 5 seconds. Then the woman near the window let out a breath she'd been holding so long her whole body shook with it. The ranch hands at the back exchanged a look that was almost disbelief. Earl, who had come in at some point during the confrontation and taken up a position near the wall with the quiet deliberateness of an old man who knows how to place himself in a room without being noticed, let his shoulders drop 2 full inches. Maggie stood behind the counter. She was looking at Jack. Her hands were still flat on the wood, but her face had done something not broken, nothing so dramatic as that. More like a door had opened somewhere behind her eyes just slightly, just enough to let something out that had been waiting a long time to leave. "He took the document," she said. "I know," Jack said. "It doesn't matter. The fraud is in the filing. Aldridge signed it with a county seal. That record exists whether he takes the copy back or not." She nodded slowly. "You told him Holt already has the evidence," she said. "Yes." "He doesn't yet. Cody's still writing." "Yes," Jack said. She looked at him steadily. "That was a bluff," she said. "The best ones always are," he said. Something crossed her face, then something complicated and warm, and entirely unguarded the expression of a woman who has been holding a very heavy thing alone for a very long time, and has just been reminded that she doesn't have to be alone while she's holding it. She turned away before it resolved into anything she'd have to put words to. Picked up the coffee pot. began making a fresh round for a diner full of people who looked like they could use one. Jack sat back down at his table. His hands were steady. Outside he heard the sound of Grady's boots cross the boardwalk and stop, and then the low, urgent sound of voices Grady and someone else too quiet to hear through the glass. Jack watched the window. 30 seconds later, Thomas Aldridge walked past at a near run, noted toward the land office. Going to check on something. Going to confirm whether what Jack had described actually existed. Going to find out whether 14 months of careful planning had just been undermined by a dead man's field notebook and an old bartender's kept letter, and a woman who refused against every pressure brought to bear against her to simply let go. Jack drank his coffee. He thought about Cody on the road to Tucson, pushing hard through cold morning air with a packet of documents inside his coat that had cost one man his life and 14 months of a woman's grief to assemble. He thought about what Grady had said on his way out the door. "You have no idea what you've started." He was wrong about that. Jack knew exactly what he'd started. The question now was what Grady was going to do in the hours before it was too late to do anything at all, and whether the thing he chose to do was going to require Jack to finish this in ways he'd spent 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days trying to leave behind. He suspected it was. He sat with his coffee and waited to find out. Thomas Aldridge came out of the land office 11 minutes after he went in. Jack knew because he'd been counting. The man moved differently than he had going in, faster, tighter, the walk of someone who had just confirmed something they were hoping wouldn't be confirmed. He crossed the street without looking left or right and went straight to the sheriff's office and didn't knock before he entered. Jack set down his coffee cup. "Earl," he said. Earl was still near the wall where he'd positioned himself during the confrontation. He looked over. "Aldridge just went into the sheriff's office," Jack said quietly. "Whatever Grady decides in the next 10 minutes is going to tell us everything about how the rest of today goes." Earl nodded once, pulled his coat on. "I'll be across the street." He left without making it look like leaving. Maggie came by with the pot. She'd been moving through the diner for the past 20 minutes with the focused efficiency of a woman who understood that the best thing she could do right now was keep everything normal, because normal was the thing Grady hadn't been able to break in 14 months, and she wasn't going to let him break it in the aftermath of this morning either. "Aldridge went to Grady," Jack said, low enough for only her. She poured without her hand shaking. "What does that mean?" "It means Grady now knows the evidence is real," Jack said, "which changes his options. He can't paper his way out of this anymore. He either runs or he escalates. Which will he do?" Jack looked at the sheriff's office across the street, the door still closed, the window dark. "He'll escalate first," Jack said. "Men like Grady don't choose retreat until retreat is the only door left. Right now he thinks he still has doors. Does he?" "One," Jack said. "If he destroys the original evidence before Holt arrives, he might be able to claim the documents are fabricated. Buy himself enough time to disappear cleanly." He looked at her directly. "The originals, Maggie. Where exactly did you hide them?" "Floorboard bedroom, left side near the window," she said. Same words she'd used the first morning. "I moved them last night. Loose board behind the kitchen stove, now you'd have to know it was there. Does anyone else know the house layout?" "Buck Malone searched it 8 months ago," she said. "After the third rejected offer. Grady sent him with a noise complaint as an excuse." Her jaw tightened at the memory. "He didn't find anything, but he knows the house." Jack stood up. "Go to the back," he said. "Stay away from the front window. If anyone comes through that door in the next hour who isn't me or Earl, go out the back and don't stop moving." He held her gaze. "I mean it." She looked at him with those steady eyes, and he could see her working through the calculation, the part of her that wanted to stand her ground against the part that understood when standing ground was strategy, and when it was just stubbornness wearing strategy's clothes. "All right," she said. She went to the back. Jack walked out the front door. He crossed the street in the open, not hurrying, and he took up a position on the boardwalk outside the general store with a clear line to the sheriff's office door, and he stood there with his hands loose at his sides and waited. 6 minutes later, the door opened. Grady came out first, then Aldridge, then Decker and Fossey, and behind them, moving with the reluctant compliance of a man who had run out of internal argument, Buck Malone. They stood on the boardwalk in a cluster, and Grady said something short, and Decker and Fossey separated from the group and started walking not toward the diner, toward the south end of town, toward the residential street where Maggie's house was. Jack moved. He was off the boardwalk and cutting across the street at an angle that would intercept Decker before the man had gone half a block, and Decker saw him coming and stopped and put his hand near his hip in the professional way of someone who has done this before and isn't alarmed by it. "Where are you going?" Jack said. "That's county business," Decker said. "County business is the land office," Jack said. "Which is that direction? You're walking this direction, which is toward a private residence." He stopped 6 feet away, same distance as always. Close enough to be clear about the conversation, far enough to have options. "What's in that house that Royce Grady needs badly enough to send 2 men for on a Friday morning?" Decker smiled. It had none of Buck's practiced pleasantness. It was the smile of a man who has been given permission to stop pretending. "Step aside, Callahan," he said. "No," Jack said. Fossey had come around the left. Jack had expected that. He turned 45 degrees, keeping both men in his field of vision, neither of them behind him, and he felt the familiar cold settling that happened when a situation moved from talk into something else entirely. Not fear, the opposite of fear. The specific calm that had always arrived unbidden and reliable in the moments when everything simplified down to the next 3 seconds. "Last chance," Decker said. "That's what people keep telling me," Jack said. Decker reached for his gun. What happened next took 4 seconds and was not clean and was not dramatic. Jack closed the distance before Decker's weapon cleared the holster, took the man's gun hand at the wrist, and used Decker's own forward momentum against him, in the economical way of someone who had learned long ago that the fastest way to end a physical confrontation is to end it before it becomes one. Decker went down hard. Jack had the gun. He turned. Fossey had his weapon out and leveled. They stood looking at each other. "Put it down," Jack said, "or use it. But decide now, because I've got no interest in waiting." Fossey was breathing fast. His eyes moved to Decker on the ground, to the gun in Jack's hand, to the street around them, calculating odds and not liking the numbers. He lowered his weapon. "Smart," Jack said. He heard boots behind him and turned to find Buck Malone 6 steps away, not running, walking with the deliberate pace of a man who had made a decision somewhere in the last 60 seconds and was now living inside it. Buck looked at Decker on the ground, looked at Fossey, looked at Jack. "Grady sent them for the house," Buck said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Jack said. Buck turned to Fossey. "Give me your weapon." His voice had changed. Something official had come back into it, something that had apparently been buried under layers of compromise and hadn't entirely died. "Both of you are under citizen detention pending federal inquiry. You have the right to—" "Buck," Jack said. Buck stopped. "Grady's still out there," Jack said. They both looked back toward the sheriff's office. Grady was gone. So was Aldridge. Jack handed Fossey's weapon to Buck, who took it with the automatic competence of someone whose training hadn't fully left him, even when his integrity had, and Jack turned and walked fast back toward the Main Street scanning. Earl was coming toward him from the opposite boardwalk. Moving faster than an old man with 2 missing fingers should have been able to move his face set and urgent. "He went to the diner," Earl said. Jack ran. He hit the diner door at a dead run and pushed through, and took in the room in one sweep, empty of customers, now just the tables and the chairs and the smell of coffee, and at the back, the sound of voices. One voice raised, and one voice not. He went through the counter gap and pushed through the kitchen door. Grady had Maggie backed against the far wall with Aldridge beside him, and a document in his hand that he was holding up between them like a weapon made of paper, and he was talking in that pleasant voice that had stopped being pleasant sometime in the last hour, and was now just the sound of a man who has burned through every other register and arrived at something raw and unguarded, and therefore more dangerous than anything that had come before. "Sign it," Grady was saying. "Right now. One signature, Maggie, and this is done. You get a fair price, you keep the diner, you walk away with your life intact." "Get away from her," Jack said. Grady turned. He had a gun in his left hand. Jack hadn't seen it when he came through the door. He saw it now. The kitchen went very quiet. "You just don't stop," Grady said. His voice had shed the pleasantness entirely. What was underneath it was tired and mean and frightened in the specific way of a man who can see the end of something he's spent his life building and cannot accept the sight of it. "I have given you every opportunity to walk away from this. I told you you don't know what you started." "Daniel Harlow started it," Jack said. He kept his eyes on Grady's gun hand. "You finished him, but you couldn't finish what he left behind." He moved one step into the room, angled slightly, putting himself between Grady and Maggie, the way water finds the space between things. "And you can't finish it now. Cody Walker reached Tucson this morning. Marshal Holt has everything: the survey report, the incorporation documents, Daniel's field notebook, his letter to the Santa Fe office." He paused. "It's done, Grady. The only thing left to decide is how it ends for you." Grady's gun hand was steady, but his breathing wasn't. Aldridge made a sound something between a word and a gasp, and took one step backward toward the door. Nobody stopped him. He wasn't the problem in this room. "You can't prove I had anything to do with Daniel Harlow," Grady said. "Buck Malone can," Jack said. The words landed like a physical thing. Grady's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: disbelief, calculation, fury, and settled on something that was all three at once layered and ugly. "Buck would never—" "Buck already did," Jack said. "An hour ago, in front of witnesses." He held Grady's gaze without flinching. "He's outside right now with Decker and Fosse in custody, awaiting federal jurisdiction." He took another step forward. "Put the gun down, Royce." "You don't get to call me that," Grady said, and his voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, just enough to reveal the thing underneath all of it, which was not evil exactly. Not the clean kind that was easy to name, but something more ordinary and more terrible. A man who had wanted things and had found a way to take them, and had told himself the story of his own authority so many times that the story had replaced everything else. "You come into my town, my valley, and you think you understand what I built here." "I understand exactly what you built," Jack said. "I've built versions of it myself." He was 4 feet away now. 3. "That's how I know it doesn't hold. It never holds. Because it's not built on anything real." 2 feet. "Put the gun down," Jack said. Quiet, certain. "Please." Something moved through Grady's face. The gun hand dropped 2 inches. Then Maggie spoke. "He's not worth it," she said. Her voice was absolutely steady. Not to Jack, to Grady. She stepped out from behind Jack, 1 step to his side, and she looked at Grady directly, with those dark eyes that had seen 14 months of what this man had cost her. "He's not worth the rest of your life. Whatever you're thinking about doing right now, it won't fix what you already did. It won't change what's already on its way." She held his gaze. "Daniel is gone. You can't undo that. But you can choose what you do with the next 60 seconds. The kitchen was so quiet that Jack could hear his own heartbeat. Grady looked at Maggie. He looked at her for a long time. And whatever he saw, the woman who had held the diner together for 14 months, who had refused 4 offers and a fabricated legal document, and a man with a gun in her own kitchen. Whatever he saw in the steadiness of her, it did something to the remaining architecture of his certainty. The gun came down. It didn't come down all the way, not to the floor, not surrendered, but down enough that Jack covered the last 2 feet and put his hand on Grady's wrist and said very quietly, "Let go." And after a moment that felt longer than it was, Grady let go. Jack stepped back with the gun. Grady stood in the middle of Maggie Harlow's kitchen without a weapon, and without his pleasant voice, and without the 9 years of structure he'd built around himself, and he looked for the first time since Tuesday like what he actually was. A man, an ordinary man who had made choices and been good at hiding them, and had run out of places to hide. "Sit down," Jack said, nodding toward the kitchen chair against the wall. Grady sat. Marshal Holt arrived the following afternoon. He came with 2 deputies and a federal warrant and the particular purposeful brevity of a man who had read a packet of documents on a hard ride from Tucson and arrived already knowing what needed to be done. He was shorter than Jack remembered, broader. His hair had gone fully gray since their last encounter, which had not been under circumstances either of them would have chosen to remember. He shook Jack's hand in the street outside the diner with the expression of a man acknowledging a complicated debt. "Callahan," he said. "Holt," Jack said. "The boy who brought me the packet," Holt said. "Cody Walker. He sat up all night on my office steps waiting for me to come in this morning. Wouldn't leave until I read every page in front of him." Jack almost smiled. "That sounds about right." "The documents are solid," Holt said. "Better than solid. The field notebook alone is enough to open a federal investigation into the water rights transfer. The incorporation documents connect Grady to Valley Water Associates through his mother's estate that's wire fraud, land fraud, abuse of office." He paused. "And the deputy, Malone. His statement about the Harlow inquiry is—" He shook his head slightly. "It's going to be a long case." "Is it enough?" Jack asked. "It's more than enough," Holt said. "Daniel Harlow built a better case than most lawyers I know." He looked at the diner door. "She know how good her husband was at this." "She's starting to," Jack said. Holt went in. Jack stayed on the boardwalk for a moment. He looked at the sheriff's office door open, Grady inside with Buck Malone standing outside it in an inversion of their usual positions that would have been almost funny if the reason for it weren't what it was. Buck had been steady since the kitchen. Quiet professional doing what needed doing with the focused efficiency of a man who has decided to stop arguing with himself and start paying the debt he owes. He'd secured Decker and Fossey without being asked. He'd written his statement out by hand before Holt arrived, all 4 pages of it in the careful printing of someone who wanted there to be no ambiguity about what he was saying and why. Jack walked over. Buck looked up. "You all right?" Jack asked. "No," Buck said honestly. "But I reckon that's appropriate." "Yeah," Jack said. "It is." They stood for a moment in the not uncomfortable silence of 2 men who have been on opposite sides of something and have both come through it changed. "What happens to me?" Buck asked, not afraid, just wanting to know the shape of it. "That's for Holt and the court to determine," Jack said. "But you came forward. You secured the scene. You wrote the statement without being asked." He looked at the younger man. "That's not nothing." "It's not enough either," Buck said. "No," Jack agreed. "But it's a start." Buck nodded once, went back to watching the door. Thomas Aldridge had run. They found this out from his clerk, who arrived at the land office at 9 in the morning to find the safe open and the most recent deed transfers missing, and Aldridge's personal effects gone from the desk drawer. He'd taken a horse from the livery at some point between the kitchen confrontation and dawn and ridden east. Holt dispatched a deputy. "He won't get far," Holt said with the calm confidence of a man who had chased people across territories before and understood that the ones who ran with things to lose were rarely as fast as the ones who ran with nothing. He was right. They brought Aldridge back 2 days later, caught at a way station 40 miles out, still carrying the deed transfers he'd taken from the safe, which added theft of county records to the list of things the federal court was going to be interested in discussing with him. Grady, by contrast, had not run, had not after the kitchen tried anything further. He sat in the jail he'd built and waited with the eerie stillness of a man who has been running from something for so long that being caught has a quality almost of relief to it, however terrible the relief. Jack thought about that sometimes in the days that followed. The particular exhaustion of a long deception, how much of a person it consumed, how much energy went into the maintenance of it, how little was left for anything else. He thought about it and recognized something in it that he didn't entirely like recognizing. He'd been running his own version of something for 4 years. Slower. Quieter. No victims, but himself. but running. On the third day after Holt's arrival, Maggie closed the diner at noon. She didn't announce it or explain it. She flipped the sign, locked the door, untied her apron, and walked out the back. Jack, who had been at his table drinking his third cup of coffee, because there was nowhere else he was supposed to be, and the diner was where he'd come to understand what staying somewhere felt like, heard the back door close and sat with the silence for a moment. Then he got up and went out the front and walked around the building. She was sitting on the step behind the diner, with her hands folded in her lap, and her face turned up and her eyes closed, and she was doing something he'd never seen her do in 3.5 months, which was nothing. Just sitting. Just being still without purpose or efficiency or the armor of industry around her. He sat on the step beside her, a few feet of distance between them, and didn't say anything. After a while, she said without opening her eyes, "Holt told me they found Daniel's original letter in the Santa Fe office. Filed and received. Never acted on." A pause. "The clerk who received it has a brother-in-law who works for the Territorial Land Commission. It went in the pile and stayed there." "I'm sorry," Jack said. "If someone had acted on it 14 months ago." She stopped, opened her eyes, looked at the middle distance with the expression of a woman who has run this particular calculation before and knows where it ends. "I keep doing that. The if. It doesn't go anywhere useful." "No," Jack said. "It doesn't." She was quiet for a moment. "Daniel knew the system might fail him," she said. "That's why he told Earl. That's why he told me. He built redundancy into it the same way he built redundancy into the water channels on the property, because he knew that any single path might fail, but enough paths wouldn't all fail at once." She looked at her hands. "He was smarter than I gave him credit for sometimes. Isn't that a terrible thing to realize?" "Not terrible," Jack said. "Human." She looked at him sideways. Something in her expression had shifted since the kitchen, since she'd told Grady he wasn't worth it in that steady, certain voice. She'd put something down. He could see the absence of it in her face, the way you can see where a stone sat after someone moves it, the grass beneath pressed flat, slowly recovering. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Now." He'd been thinking about that. "I need to write a letter," he said. She waited. "To my daughter," he said. She didn't say anything. She didn't arrange her face into an expression of encouragement or approval. She just received the information with the same directness she applied to everything, and somehow that was the right response. "It's been 15 years, he said. "I don't know if she'll answer." "You don't know that she won't," Maggie said. "No," he said. "I don't know that." They sat with that for a while. "Will you stay?" she asked. Quiet. Not heavy with implication, just the actual question. He looked at her. He thought about the 4 years of drifting that had brought him here. The careful discipline of being nothing. The window table, and the coffee, and the slow accumulation of mornings in a place where someone had treated him with ordinary human decency and not asked him to explain himself and what that had done to him quietly, without his noticing, until it was already done. He thought about Daniel Harlow, who had loved his wife in the plain, unglamorous way of decent men, and had died trying to protect what was hers, and had been smart enough and careful enough to make sure the truth outlasted him. He thought about Ellie, a doctor somewhere in Colorado, eyes like her mother, stubbornness like him. He hadn't earned the right to her forgiveness, but maybe he'd earned the right to try. "For a while," he said. "Yes." Something moved across Maggie's face, warm and private, and quickly returned to its usual composure, but there long enough to see. "Good," she said simply. She stood up, smoothed her apron, the gesture he'd learned to recognize the gathering of herself back into motion. She looked down at him still sitting on the step, and there was something in how she looked at him that had no name he wanted to give it yet, but that he intended for the first time in 4 years to let exist without covering it over. "I'm going to reopen it too," she said. "I could use someone to manage the counter while I do the accounts." "I don't know anything about running a counter," he said. "You know how to pour coffee?" she said. "That's most of it." He stood up. She went back inside. He followed. The letter to Holt took 3 days to wind through official channels and come back as confirmation. The federal investigation was open. The indictments were being drafted. The railroad meeting had been canceled, and the buyer from Tucson had quietly distanced himself from any association with Grady or Aldridge, with the practiced efficiency of a man whose business depended on not being near collapsing things when they collapsed. Grady was transferred to federal custody on a Thursday, 2 weeks to the day after he'd walked into Harlow's diner and struck a woman across the face in front of 6 witnesses who hadn't moved. Buck Malone's cooperation was noted in Holt's report. His future was still uncertain, wound up in the machinery of the federal court's consideration. But Holt had told Jack privately that a man who came forward voluntarily secured a scene, provided a sworn statement, and had no prior federal violations was in a different position than the men he'd helped, and that position, while not comfortable, was not hopeless. Earl Briggs had his first real drink in 2 weeks on the night Grady left. Jack was at the bar when he poured it. "Well?" Earl said, lifting his glass. "Well," Jack said. They didn't say anything else. They didn't need to. The letter to Ellie took Jack 4 evenings to write. Not because he didn't know what to say. He knew exactly what to say. Had known for years, had simply not been ready to say it until now. It took 4 evenings because he wanted to say it right. Not well necessarily, not eloquently, but honestly, without the comfortable evasions he'd been using on himself for 15 years. He told her where he was, what had happened. Not in detail, she didn't need his accounting of someone else's redemption. He told her he'd been drifting and had stopped, and that he understood if that meant nothing to her, and that he wasn't writing to ask for anything except the chance to know she was well. He told her he'd heard she was a doctor, and that he was proud of her in the way a man is proud of something he had no hand in building but loves anyway helplessly without the right to claim it. He told her he was sorry, not with explanations attached, just sorry. He sealed it and gave it to the post office on a Friday morning, and walked back to the diner, and sat at his table by the window, and drank his coffee, and did not know whether she would answer, and accepted not knowing. Maggie brought a second cup without being asked. She didn't ask him about the letter. He appreciated that. He looked out the window at Red Rock Valley, going about its ordinary morning business, people moving on the street, voices and hoofbeats, and the distant sound of the smithy. And he thought about how a town could look the same from a distance and be entirely different inside. He thought about Cody, who had ridden 40 miles in the dark with federal documents in his coat and sat on a marshal's steps all night to make sure they were read. Who had come back to Red Rock walking a little taller than he'd left, in the way of someone who had discovered something about themselves they hadn't known was there. He thought about Daniel Harlow, who had loved a piece of land and a woman and the truth about both of them, and had died for it, and had been careful enough that his dying hadn't been the end of any of those things. He thought about the 4 years he'd spent trying to be nothing. He thought about how strange it was that the thing that had finally stopped the drifting was the same thing that had always stopped him. Not peace, not rest, not the absence of anything, but the presence of something worth standing in front of. Something worth staying for. He looked up. Maggie was behind the counter, moving through the morning's work with the quiet competence that was her particular form of beauty, not the beauty of arrangement or display, but the beauty of a person entirely themselves, entirely present, doing what needed doing with the whole of who they were. She caught his eye across the room. Just for a moment. She didn't smile, didn't nod, just looked at him with those dark eyes that had seen 14 months of the worst kind of alone, and had not broken under it, and had somehow, through all of it, kept a lamp burning in the window. He looked back, and Jack Callahan, who had spent 4 years, 2 months and 11 days counting the days, since the last time he'd been something more than the shadow of a man passing through, stopped counting. Red Rock Valley was not where he'd been running to. It was simply where the running ended, and where for the first time in longer than he deserved something new and quiet and real began.